The reason we created this exhibit, first of all, was the fact that the museum houses an enormous collection of antique natural history prints that have come to us from a number of very generous donors, particularly Mr. and Mrs. John Greer and Mr. and Mrs. Joel Renning. And this has given us a huge asset here. The first artist, who was John White, who came to the New World and was associated with the ill-fated Roanoke colony, Croatan and all those good stories that went with that. And White made 4 voyages to the Virginia, North Carolina area, and he did a number of watercolors. And he returned to England, and they were borrowed by Theodore Debris, who made engravings of 23 of these that depicted the Indians, because that was the focus and interest at that particular point, and it was published by Thomas Harriot. The watercolors that John White had done disappeared and did not resurface again for 198 years. So that is why we can't start with John White. The watercolors are lovely, but they weren't published until 1946 in color. So that's why we start right here with a few of the engravings that Debris did based upon the John White watercolors. It is interesting that the very first picture of a bird in the New World is in the engraving here by Jacques Des Moines in Florida, and pictured here are some turkeys. We don't have the original, obviously, on exhibit, but that's the very first bird print, if you will. Mark Catesby grew up in England and acquired a very great interest in natural history as a youth. He visited his sister in 1712 in Virginia and came in contact with the rich, abundant flora and fauna that existed in that area. He returned to England and began to seek support. And this is an important thing to understand about these early natural historians, is they did not have the funding ability to go off on their own to collect all of the numerous species and so on. They needed to find patrons among the nobility in Europe. And so Mark Catesby was no different. He acquired the patronage of a very important person, Hans Sloane, who was the founder of the British Museum. And in fact, many of Catesby's collections ultimately ended up in the British Museum. We think about how in the world do you get all these specimens of plants and so on back. Well, he sent back seeds and fruits stored in gourds, and many of them were planted, and some of them still exist in the herbaria today in England that Catesby had actually originated. But the animals were different things. They were packed quite often in bottles of rum. And the big problem was keeping the sailors from drinking the preservative before the creatures got back to Europe. But in any case, Catesby began assembling the results of his work, which were first published in 1731 as a natural history of Carolina, Florida, and the Bahama Islands, which included 220 plates, hand-colored engravings, illustrating 109 birds, 33 amphibians, 46 fishes, 31 insects, 9 quadrupeds, and 171 plants. Interestingly, as you go through the Catesby, you'll see that he combines the plants and the animals together, such as you're really getting 2 for 1 there. Sometimes it's kind of a mixed bag that the plant and the bird would never be seen together because the plant may be native to the Bahamas and the birds to North Carolina. Truly, Catesby was a pioneer in scientific illustration, and it really not until Audubon, 100 years later, is his work really eclipsed, and truly he is a very important person in the emergence of the natural history of the Southeast. Well, although Mark Catesby is the major focus of this exhibit and comprises the largest number of prints that we have here, what we wanted to do, since we have this extensive collection, was to give the viewer and the museum visitor an opportunity to see how natural history prints changed over time, and to take it all the way up to contemporary natural history artists. So we start with Eliezer Alban, who is a contemporary of Catesby. Alban is another important person. His artistry is perhaps a little bit more stiff. I think that it was not as successful, obviously, as Catesby, but also his focus was on European birds. We move from there to a fellow by the name of Minetti, and we only include this because these are not birds that appear in the southeastern United States, though the species we show are merganser, the mergansers here. But the interesting thing about Minetti, between 1767 and 1776, he published 600 engravings of birds. They are beautifully colored, they are in all kinds of interesting positions, and many of them are dedicated to various politicians and church officials. And there's probably within his book a political message to be seen by the association of certain birds with certain people. But he was a profuse producer of natural history prints, and we have a very large collection thanks to the rentings of the Minettis, and they're a fun bunch of pictures, so we did include two of them in this exhibit. William Bartram is well known for his travels through North and South Carolina, and he published this book in 1791. And it is a major source in anthropology, geography, natural history for the southeastern United States. And he has a very good ornithological list in there of the birds. Alexander Wilson is considered by many to be the father of American ornithology. While Catesby we've called the founder, we're calling Wilson the father. He was a close friend and a student of William Bartram, so he had a great deal of information there. Between 1808 and 1814, he produced the 9-volume American Ornithology with 320 figures. They are beautifully executed, and it is probable, according to scholars, that he influenced Audubon to move ahead with the production of his studies of the birds and embark on his own publication, which unfortunately would eclipse Wilson, really. Audubon's name has really become synonymous with birds and their protection, even today with the Audubon Society and any number of products that bear that name. He was an exceptional person. Really, we were speaking of how these guys went in and traveled at these times. Well, he literally explored from really the eastern half of North America, from Labrador to the Florida Keys and out to the Great Plains. One disappointment that he had was that he never made it to the Rockies or the Pacific coast to finish his work. But nevertheless, he did succeed in painting nearly 500 of the 650 identified species here in North America. Between 1820 and 1838, he did this work, which was to result in the famous Birds of America, which was published in between 1827 and 1838. These paintings were based upon observation, but also the actual specimens themselves. In fact, some of them he actually mounted on wire mounts and traced them with graph paper in order to get them exact. The other thing that we see with Audubon is that he sought to show them in their natural habitats. We had seen this some with Catesby. Catesby was attempting a similar thing, but it's brought really to an artistic peak and success with Audubon. And he also wanted to depict these in their lifelike positions, and many of them are incredible, some of the action that is going on in these. Now, in around 1845, Audubon and his sons published the quadrupeds of North America. And this was completed by his sons, and we have one on exhibit here of a badger, and it's the large elephant-sized folio. And then to round it out, we have a print that was done called the Amsterdam edition. This was a limited edition of 250 folios of Audubon done on very fine acid-free paper, and is really the only copy or reproduction Audubon that carries any sort of collector value today. And we have the mallard ducks, a really very interesting piece done in 1971. So Audubon is an important component, and when we call Catesby the Colonial Audubon, I think that the visitor to the gallery, on one side of the room we have a wall of Catesbys, and over here a selection of Audubons. I think we invite the visitor to move back and forth because we tried to choose many of the birds that Catesby had illustrated to show them here, as well as with the other artists. We included Predo John Selby in the exhibition, primarily because the Rennings just recently gave us several examples which we had not had in our collection. Selby was a contemporary of Audubon and of John Gould. His publication is the illustrations of British ornithology. These are all European English birds, but they are wonderful to look at, to compare with the other artists that we have in the exhibit gallery. And Selby did interact with Audubon, he did influence him, and in fact Selby took drawing lessons from Audubon, and I think that it would be good to compare the two because it certainly had an influence there. Perhaps the most prolific producer of bird prints is John Gould, who oversaw, is the best word, the production of 2,999 hand-colored lithographs in 14 folio books. And we have in the exhibit here, actually, two examples of these folio books of the birds that would be seen in the southeast. Most of Gould's are the exotic parts of the world, New Guinea, Australia, the Himalayas, and of course the European birds. But his painting, his hand-colored lithographs with done by several artists and lithographers are absolutely just breathtaking in the colors that have been applied to them and the exotic birds that he illustrated. These and some that we have over in our decorative arts gallery also, of some of the more exotic toucans and the like, are really quite spectacular. And I think you will find as you go into hotels and the like, you'll see, in addition to reproduction Audubons, you'll run into an awful lot of reproduction John Goulds. Moving further along, and again taking from our collection, we include Daniel Elliott, who was one of the founders of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. And just to, again, provide the visitor with different artists' interpretations and depictions of birds, we included one Elliott of the long-crested jay. Similarly with Henry Dresser. He is an English ornithologist, and basically he did the history of the birds of Europe. These two that we show are birds that we'll find here, the hooded merganser and the pheasant, but again he was primarily depicting European birds. But it's important as we develop this theme from literally the 16th century running all the way up to the end of the 19th century. These are important to see, and again we're looking here at hand-colored lithographs. Moving up to the 20th century, One really interesting person to me, the story of this individual is quite exceptional. And this is Rex Brasher. And he is perhaps America's most prolific and greatest bird painters. Between 1911 and 1924, he painted a total of 875 color paintings depicting 1,200 species or subspecies of birds in their natural habitat. And in 1929, he published these. And you know what happened in 1929? The stock market crashed. And as a result, it almost destroyed his project. And his book, The Birds and Trees of North America, had to be printed in black and white. Over a 3-year period, from 1929 to 1932, Brasher personally hand-colored 90,000 of the black and white reproductions to make 100 complete 12-volume sets. I mean, just the thought of coloring 90,000 reproductions is astounding. They are beautiful. We show the woodpecker and a kingbird here. We end the exhibit by coming to two contemporary 20th century, Roger Torrey Peterson, who probably like Audubon is synonymous with bird watching. And the reason we have him here is because here is the move to reach the demand by the public, something that could be used to identify birds. And his handbooks that he did, the Field Guide to the Birds, phenomenal publication, first published in 1934, again in 39, 47, and in 1980, probably has introduced more people to the love of birds and to the natural world than any other individual. And his field guide is exceptional. It shows the birds with arrows. It shows you the key points to look at. And so we include an example of his 1980 field guide here. We end with Guy Koliak merely because he is, we have Koliaks in the university collections here. There are a number of contemporary natural history painters all doing superb work. Guy Koliak is certainly one of the world's foremost natural history painters, still painting today. And we end with an artist's proof of the snowy owl, just to show you the detail that his work exhibits, and is a fitting end to our story of what amounts to about 400 years of natural history prints in the Southeast. One other thing I'd like to mention is in the center part of the gallery we have two cases, one illustrating the process of engraving on copper plates and the other on lithography, that is engraving on the image on a stone, and then subsequently how these are printed and colored. These are both compliments of Beauvais Lyons in the art department, who is a internationally renowned lithographer. One thing I think that I would like to really conclude with here is the point that the museum's collections are for the most part made up by contributions from individuals, both in money but primarily in objects. And in this gallery right here are represented some of our dearest friends, Mr. and Mrs. John Greer, Joel and Artie Renning, who are so well represented here in the bird collections. And Graham Rader, who has made much of this possible, and making contacts with various individuals who have enabled us to purchase a number of these Catesbys to add to our collections. And I'd like to mention each of them. Mr. and Mrs. Michael Schneeweiss, Jeffrey Siegel, Bruce Listman, Mr. and Mrs. Mark Kalemian, David Ford, Mr. and Mrs. Leo Bretter, Mr. and Mrs. Paul T. Jones, Mr. and Mrs. Alexander Moskwa, and Murat Aslanson. These people have helped to make this a permanent part of the museum and something that will be in here for future generations to enjoy and to study, and we thank them. In addition to those that made the objects in here possible, I would like to make a personal thanks to First Tennessee Bank and First Tennessee Foundation for sponsoring this exhibition, and also for many of the other sponsorships that they've done over the years. First Tennessee is a very good friend.